Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Skillshare. So if you watched that fairly boring Super Bowl that the Kansas City Chiefs definitely should have been in, or if you were just on the internet that day, you probably already know that the Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness trailer dropped. And I think it gave us a lot more questions than answers, which is what you want from a trailer. Just from this alone, I feel like there's so many potential conversations to be had. How Sam Raimi-esque will this movie feel tonally? How much of it will touch on the finale of Loki? How big of a role will both Wanda and America Chavez have in it? And that's even setting aside all the alternate versions of Strange himself that look like they'll make an appearance. But there was one thing in this trailer that came totally and completely out of left field for me. That tiny appearance from Patrick Stewart, presumably reprising his role as Charles Xavier. In the age of endless leaks, I was happy to be taken off guard by this one. In the past, the MCU seemed really reluctant to acknowledge the existence of mutants at all, and now between this and the odd Quicksilver appearance in WandaVision, it looks like they're continuing to bring in the cast of the Fox movies. It's an odd choice, and I think there's a lot to dig into there. Now, longtime viewers of the channel will know that I actually talked about my feelings on the X-Men coming to the MCU in an old video from 2018. But I think this news really deserves some speculation of its own. The fact is, I never expected them to bring anyone back from the Fox movies. Now that they have, I think the questions are, where does the X-Men go from here? Does Marvel really plan to continue the Fox franchise in some form? And where does Deadpool fit into things? Well, that's what I want to talk about this week, my feelings on how the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going about this. But feel free to add your own theories and opinions in the comments below. And while you're there, why not like and subscribe? Enough of that though, let's just talk some Professor X.
I have summoned the X-Men into a trap.
I shut the defensive perimeter down for the wedding.
So I'm gonna be honest, I think this is kind of a weird move, and it makes me wonder how much of the Fox X-Men universe will survive going into the MCU. Like I said, before this and WandaVision, I would have guessed absolutely none. These movies had a very spotty track record, with the last two, Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix, feeling like little more than an afterthought. Unlike the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man series, which had a long resting period before his appearance in No Way Home, the X-Men movies didn't really go out in one big overcooked ball of memorable wackiness like Spider-Man 3, it just kind of outstayed its welcome. Hugh Jackman really managed to find his own distinct take on Wolverine, but Logan feels like such a definitive end to that version of the character that returning to Jackman would feel a little bit wrong. I think Patrick Stewart's Professor X is another aspect of those movies, along with probably both versions of Magneto, that has retained some real goodwill from fans. So if you're gonna bring someone back, it makes sense to pick him and not that universe's awful take on Cyclops. And I love Patrick Stewart as an actor. I mean, he's Jean-Luc Picard. I can't picture myself complaining that he's in a movie. But, and a lot of you may disagree with me on this, I kinda wish they had put all of this aside and just started fresh. Now, to be fair to the MCU here, it's not like this trailer sets up Professor X as the leader of the X-Men who's very ready for a spin-off or anything. It looks inspired by the Illuminati comics, where he's in some sort of council that monitors the multiverse. The real point is though, it definitely seems like they're going in a different direction with him. But I think it still leads to the obvious question. Do we want him back as Professor X in an X-Men movie? I'm gonna stake my claim now and just say flat out that I don't. Nothing at all against Patrick Stewart, he is really good in the role, but I think the next appearance of the X-Men needs to go out of its way to feel totally distinct. And if they do feature a new cast, led by a new Professor X, I think there's plenty of room for a different take on that character. Stewart's Xavier has always drawn heavily on the traits he was known for in Star Trek. He's warm, kind, caring, and wise. Now, the Professor X of the comics has definitely been all of those things, especially as Stewart's take on the character began to influence how comic book writers wrote him, something that you can also see really clearly with like Tony Stark and Robert Downey Jr., but it's not the only valid take on Professor X. If you go back with fresh eyes and read the old Chris Claremont stuff, you may be surprised at the Charles Xavier you find there. He's a much pricklier, more ego-driven man, a character that can often be quick to anger and even quicker to judgment, mirroring his nemesis Magneto in more ways than he'd probably like to admit. I'm not saying he was evil or anything, but he was definitely more flawed. Oftentimes, in the immortal words of Kitty Pryde, Professor Xavier is a jerk. James McAvoy did a good job of tapping into this a bit in First Class, creating a Professor X who probably drinks a little too much. But I think that old Claremont Xavier still remains largely unadapted, a man of unshakable beliefs who tends to always think he's the smartest guy in the room. That more flawed, emotionally combustible version of the character, combined with a new take on the X-Men that really embraces the costumes and ditches the dreary uniforms of the Fox films, I think would feel fresh and exciting. But all of those choices feel pretty far away right now, since all we have to go off of is this trailer. And I'm very curious to see how large of a role Professor X ends up playing. I think the safest bet is probably on this being a glorified cameo, maybe a scene or two. But if large chunks of this movie take place in a universe where mutants exist, that would definitely be a new step for the MCU. Maybe the events of this film will cause these worlds to merge, giving them a reason to have mutants running around the streets of New York even if they were never mentioned in previous films. In a world where the #1 biggest grossing movie of the last few years features dimension-hopping Spider-Men, that definitely doesn't feel out of the realm of possibility. I just really hope that the X-Men eventually do get their own stories, and that the MCU doesn't settle into a rhythm of barely using or reinterpreting the characters, just calling in an old Fox cast member for a bit part here or there. But maybe the MCU goes a different route. It's really clear that they're very invested in this multiverse idea. That kinda seems to be where both Marvel and DC are going. Just look at the Flash movie that's building Michael Keaton's Batman into its narrative. I think all of this could easily lend itself to things like a Deadpool and Hugh Jackman Wolverine team-up movie, which would probably make a lot of people happy. To me, that prospect sounds a lot less appealing than just giving a new Wolverine the spotlight. Maybe someone that's more in line with the short, stocky, barrel-chested brawler that's always been my favorite take on the character. Either way though, it does really feel like Marvel is at this interesting fork in the road. Do they keep embracing these Fox movies and bringing back old cast members like No Way Home did for Spider-Man? Or do they start their own take on X-Men, one that could stand on its own 2 feet but also comes with the risk of audiences not liking that version of the character? Personally, while I liked No Way Home a lot, I'm not sure it's something that can be repeated that well with the X-Men. I mean, setting aside the fact that it already kind of has with Days of Future Past. The fact is, those movies just don't carry the same weight as the Raimi Spider-Man films. None of this is bad news for the new Doctor Strange, I don't think, but it could spell trouble for the X-Men if Disney relegates them to just being the Fox cast forever. The X-Men, at their height, were Marvel's #1 sellers, and I just think they deserve a little better than that. I don't know, I'm just really hoping that the MCU is able to strike a balance between the old and the new that somehow works.
I now bind the Phoenix with the power of...
But I want to know what you think. Do you want that full-on return of the old cast, or maybe you're sick of them? Feel free to share your own thoughts below. If you want your own platform to share those thoughts though, I really want to recommend Marquez Brownlee's YouTube Success, Script, Shoot, and Edit on Skillshare. I keep pitching this one for a reason, because Brownlee is the ideal YouTube mentor. He doesn't expect you to have expensive gear or years of editing experience. His class really hones in on the tools you already have, like that smartphone camera, and building everything out from there. Obviously, that's just the surface of what Skillshare has to offer, so whether you're trying to make YouTube videos, direct a film of your own, need help managing your time and productivity, or just about anything in between, they'll have something on what you need. Skillshare is curated for learning, so don't worry about seeing any ads. I know it's hard to find time to learn, but Skillshare really takes away that stress by fitting into your schedule. So why not try something new with a premium membership, and the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So go to that link in the description box below and start learning today.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.